the education-focused creative practice researcher experiences, approaches and networks. My name's Andrew Lavery. I'm an Associate Professor and Co-Director and Co-Chair of Sydney College of the Arts at the University of Sydney. I acknowledge that I am zooming from unceded Gadigal land here in Sydney, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. Participants may wish to acknowledge the land from which they are zooming. Now, I'd like to frame the national context of this webinar. In its discussions, the DDCA has recognised the emergence of education-focused academics in recent decades, the challenges and growing needs of this cohort, and most importantly, their innovations that blend teaching and creative practice. Accordingly, this webinar is aimed at showcasing and supporting our education-focused creative practice academics with a view to building national discourse and expanding opportunities for academics working at the intersection of teaching and practice. Our hope is that the webinar will help the broader community to foster a supportive environment nationally for education-focused academics in creative practice disciplines. I'd like to acknowledge DDCA colleague, Professor Jessica Wilkinson, with whom I work closely to bring this webinar and its participants together. The webinar, while short, is designed to cater to a broad range of participants curious about enhancing their work at the intersection of teaching and creative practice, from education-focused academics to those in the teaching and research category, and also managers of academics in various contexts. So an important note is that the DDCA will record the first two sessions, noting that we will not publish the chat, but will formulate a general summary of the discussion and key points without identifying individuals. Importantly, the third session, which is an open discussion, will not be recorded to encourage a lively discussion. And once again, we will come up with a summary of that discussion without identifying individuals. So we'll remind you that we're turning the recording off at the end of the first two sessions. So while enjoying the first two sessions, we want you to think about topics such as ethics, ways of building communities, and novel ways of integrating creative practice for a question and answer discussion in the last session. Comments placed in the chat will be selected and delivered to both speakers in session 3 by me and DDCA representatives. Our first presenter, Ted Mitew, will share his school's novel workload model for its EF cohort, his experience developing a community of practice for these academics at the University of Sydney, and will highlight key projects that have grown from this group. So at the conclusion of this presentation, Ted will show one slide with provocations for your chat comments for discussion in the third session of the webinar. Next, Professor Dan Harris will offer a speed workshop on approaches to writing about his teaching as research for education-focused creative practice scholars, and the ethics or value of demonstrating research as inherently pedagogical and teaching as research practice in these challenging times. The session will close with a sharing opportunity for all participants about how we keep practice alive as an EF academic. So the third and final session will be a moderated Q&A with Ted and Dan, which takes your questions and provocations from the chat and leads to an open discussion about how people keep their creative practice alive in combination with teaching. So I'd now like to introduce capacity building for EF academics. Dr. Ted Mitew is a senior lecturer in digital media at the School of Art, Communication and English at the University of Sydney. His research and teaching focus on digital cultures, artificial intelligence, networks and emerging technologies. He established and coordinates the School of Art, Communication and English Education, Innovation, Community of Practice, which supports education-focused academics in developing, testing, and sharing new approaches to teaching. His recent work is focused on AI-integrated assessment, multimodal learning, scalable curriculum design, and building collaborative structures for educational innovation. Welcome, Ted.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. I would like to very quickly acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And the second thing I need to do is share my screen. So when Andrew invited me to give this brief spiel, I was thinking how to present what is actually an ongoing process, and not to present it as some sort of great achievement, but as an ongoing process. So please use this as the master frame to everything I'm going to be talking about next. The title of my presentation is Educational Innovation as Distributed Leadership, because I want to pinpoint that my role here, insofar as I have had the role as a coordinator and founder of the community of practice I'm going to be talking about, is actually a facilitator of this process of distributed educational innovation. So my talk is about how our school, the School of Art, Communication and English at the University of Sydney, has been building practical and collegial mechanism for turning education-focused academics and the work of education-focused academics into a shared school capacity. So the key idea here, as I already mentioned, is distributed leadership, and the recognition that educational change and educational innovation doesn't have to originate as some sort of prescribed output coming from formal management structures, right? So it can emerge from academics who solve actual problems in the classroom, and provided, of course, there is a mechanism that captures those innovations and allows them to travel and to spread within a school, within a discipline. So the community of practice, the education innovation community of practice, as its full name goes, was conceived as such a mechanism. It connects individual practice, collective learning within the school, and tries to break down is probably the wrong term, tries to percolate through as we all know, siloed areas within school or faculty, and to connect colleagues who work within separate domains. So at our university, at the University of Sydney, education focus roles are framed as part of a broader kind of strategically viewed transformation of teaching and learning. So we have a model which is called the Horizon Education model, Horizon Educators model, and it positions education-focused academics as a community of educational change makers. So the education-focused academics have a formal strategic role within the university's strategic plan. So education-focused academics have access to professional development, to fellowship pathways, and to university-level grants for educational innovation. And so education-focused roles also have clearly defined research and scholarship responsibilities. And this framing is important as a context because it recognizes that education-focused roles create a different kind of academic leadership. So teaching remains central, of course, but the role also creates this expectation that knowledge generated through teaching would feed through scholarship and curriculum design and institutional change, and will percolate throughout the institution, throughout the system, as different kind of waves of teaching and learning innovation. And so if you take this strategy on board and think through its implications, you realize that inevitably, invariably, the classroom then becomes a little bit of an R&D environment, right? Because we have to test practices, we have to involve students in the process, we have to evaluate what works, and then we have to, in effect, ask what those practices can can do beyond one unit. So the scalability is always already baked into this strategy and into this way of conceiving education-focused academics as part of the innovation process. And so the challenge is creating structures that would allow this scalability, this percolation to happen. So the corollary here is that usually when we innovate in academia, it happens locally, it's siloed in, and it's more or less kind of packaged in a let's call it a vacuum, right? So you have a tutor solving something, or coordinator building a guide, or someone might be testing AI feedback in their class. And unless this work is captured, shared, and adapted, it invariably remains trapped inside some sort of silo. It might be unit level silo, it might be discipline level silo, right? So the problem with universities is that we do actually enormous amount of educational innovation. We might be sharing it via publications, but the problem is that at system level, transmission usually is a problem. So it's not invention and innovation as such that actually the obstacle is transmission. So without mechanisms for diffusion, which are formalized and recognized at system level, we end up paying repeatedly for the same innovation. And so the community of practice that I'm talking to you about was initiated at the end of 2024. So I shortly after I joined the school, and I structured it in a kind of peer collaborative way by first consulting with everyone I could in terms of formal roles and informal roles within the school, in terms of figuring out what potential problems are, what potential developmental vectors for innovation research. And it was structured as a mechanism for collaborative pedagogical innovation, right? So it started with 14 education-focused colleagues. Currently, it has grown to 17. And it supports, this is at school level, not discipline level, right? So it comprises a number of different disciplines. And it supports work in AI assessment design, inclusive pedagogy, scalable feedback, and reusable teaching resources. So it sits as you can think of the community of practices sitting as a useful middle layer, which is more structured than completely informal kind of coffee level collegial exchange. But it's, of course, much lighter than a formal school committee or some sort of centrally managed project, right? So it's ongoing and it's kind of partially informal in this sense. And it gives education-focused academics across the school somewhere to bring an experiment, an idea, to find collaborators, to expose unfinished practice to peers for feedback, and convert what works into something reusable, ideally. And so it's one of the guiding principles, and we have a number of those, is that expertise is not assumed to sit within one coordinator. We continuously discover in our workshops and in our discussions that expertise might appear from surprising corners where you wouldn't expect that someone in this discipline would be really interested in this specific AI tool, for example, and would know a lot about it. So different colleagues lead where they have actual practice and experience. And when it comes to project framework, we keep the logic very simple, and that's a deliberate choice. We focus on improving students' educational experience and either reducing measurably a staff workload or at least not increasing it. So this is a guiding principle, not to create more work for colleagues and for ourselves. So again, the kind of context here is that innovation that relies on heroic overwork and heroic overcommitment is not actually innovation, but slow institutional self-harm. It's basically, it leads to burnout, and it's not sustainable and most definitely not scalable. And so this is, I'm framing this deliberately in this way because universities are very good at producing innovations that generate new labor and not scalable, right? And not sustainable. So they might be very innovative, very beautiful, but very time-bounded and most certainly not scalable. So whether it's a tool or assessment redesign or teaching intervention that improves learning but requires 3 additional hours every week, there is a scaling problem built into it immediately, right? So workload itself should be a design variable. So this was baked into the way we were imagining the community of practice from the very beginning. And so we came up with this direct model of different levels of contribution where we have immediate understanding that not everyone will have the same capacity to contribute based on their specific workload hours. And I made a deliberate choice not to bore you with our specific workload set up at the University of Sydney and in our school, but different academics, different education-focused academics would have different amount of hours available for educational innovation based on their commitment, for example, whether they're preparing for fellowship or whether they're doing a graduate certificate or any sort of other kind of upskilling, which comes with its own workload package as well. And so we try to operationalize this principle. Not every educational innovation needs to become a major project. You could have small projects that plug in, or you could have multiple people collaborate on one larger project. And so when it comes to what we achieved last year, the mechanism is very simple. We tried to continuously move from isolated practice to shared capacity. Again, I already mentioned the importance of scalability and percolation and sharing as soon as possible. So this included last year, we generated a number of AI prompt engineering banks and different teaching hacks when it comes to multimodal AI in the classroom, secure assessment frameworks with templates for colleagues, inclusive classroom strategies, which inclusive classrooms are a really important issue for us because, for example, in my discipline, more than 90%, that's 90% of our students are international students, mostly from mainland China. So inclusive classroom practices are of fundamental importance when it comes to educational innovation for us. And finally, scalable feedback using cognitive agents. So these are AI agents which we built in-house. We write the master prompts for them in-house and then deploy them via Canvas. So very important point here, everything that you see here in terms of deliverables is not aimed at other education-focused colleagues only, it's aimed at everyone in the school, right? So these are our workshops are attended by a number of colleagues from who are not education-focused, but benefit from this educational innovation solutions and templates, prompt banks, etc. So more than 40 colleagues participated in projects and a much larger number participated in our workshops. And we estimate that we impacted around 5,000 students last year via our education innovation projects. So the important thing here I want to emphasize is this feedback loop, right? We don't begin with some sort of abstract best practice document and then tell people how to implement it. We usually begin with real teaching experience, with real teaching problems that we try to address. And so we have a number of iterative testing stages, discussions with peers, and a workshop which demonstrates the discoveries and deliverables. We have documentation, and finally, anything that is kind of stable and can be scaled, we share it via a dedicated Canvas page. So when it comes to really important takeaways, in the last year's series of workshops, we discussed AI and assessment, inclusion, multimodal teaching. And in this year, we kind of consolidated into 4 macro areas, even though we have more workshops this year than we had last year. We have, when it comes to the AI stream, we have live glossaries, prompting data banks, workshops, multimodal use cases involving things like Notebook LM and a collaboration with AI startup Leonardo AI. community-assisted feedback, all sorts of different success stories. And so the point here is that there is a clear evolution that I want to point at. Last year, much of the work was exploratory. We were testing concrete problems that we identified as problems in the school when it comes to teaching and learning. This year, we are kind of starting to cluster into larger capability areas. So that's why I describe this as more as an ecology rather than a list of projects. And so the kind of more operational level, let's not call it strategic, but operational level aim is that several different pilots can contribute to the same kind of shared capability rather than each project terminating in its own little, again, box and not going anywhere else. So in terms of provocations and in terms of things to discuss and think about, one of the serious, and in fact, this affects everyone, and all of you are, I'm sure, aware of this as a problem, is AI as a stress test for our teaching practices. And it's popular and easy to think of AI as a cheating, in terms of a kind of cheating narrative, cheating discourse. But the deeper issue that is being opened up is that AI emerges as a mode shift. That I'll put it in this way, in teaching and in assessment and feedback and student production. And so we tried in our community of practice to address this as by prototyping AI use guides and reporting forums, prompting guides, community agents, and multimodal portfolio assessments with shared backend configuration. So, for example, one multimodal portfolio assessment that I developed is now is the template for the university when it comes to portfolio design. And so we are developing assessments in the community of practice, which later we hope would scale up to at least school level, if not faculty or university level. And so from this perspective, generative AI is useful because it serves as a mode of exposure. And again, this is part of my provocation for you. It exposes problems that were already present, but we worked very hard not to see. So if an assessment becomes challenged or starts becoming meaningless the moment students have access to a large language model, we probably, again, in terms of a provocation, we probably need to ask what was that assessment actually measuring? AI also exposes professional development as a problem, right? Or as a massive problem, I would say. Because student adoption is extremely fast. You all know how fast and how accelerating AI development itself is. But staff adoption is uneven for a multiplicity of reasons. And professional development is uneven and it's not really addressed systemically by universities usually. And so you have radically different classroom expectations across units within the same discipline, let alone within the same school or faculty. And so multimodal AI is a separate kind of problem because the disruption that it generates moves beyond essays, right? So we have image and video and audio and agentic systems as well. So I already have students who run their own AI agents on their smartphones in class. So this turns AI literacy into a general production literacy rather than simply a writing issue. So it's not a writing issue anymore. And my second provocation slide is this, that we the next stage in terms of educational innovation, in my opinion, is not more activity and not more projects even, but coordination, right? So clearer pathways from experimentation to adoption, very clear vectors of development of momentum, if you will, for education-focused stuff, to make it very clear how your idea can almost adopting a startup mindset, if you will, how your idea can very quickly be adopted and what that would mean for your academic progression. So from adoption to evaluation, from evaluation to publication or institutional policy and academic progression.
Ted,
And so
it's just Andrew Lavery. We're going to have to wrap up your session shortly. Do you have more slides to show? Or?
Final one.
Yeah.
And yes, I just wanted to say that the community of practice is a translation machine, actually. And by translation machine, I mean the fact that you have different disciplines within the school, and this is one of the most valuable things about academia. And so translation here means extracting what is portable and scalable from local practice without destroying or leveling the context. It's really important to have that heterogeneous context in place when it comes to a school's ecology, so to retain the difference between disciplines while scaling up interesting ideas. And yeah, I can stop here. Thank you all for listening.
Many thanks, Ted. We'll move right along. While Dan gets ready, I'll introduce him. So his session is titled Strategies for Converting Teaching Practice to Outputs. Daniel X. Harris is a professor in the School of Education at RMIT, is the founding director of Creative Agency Research Lab, and is a playwright, cabaret pianist, and performance poet. They have been the recipient of over $4 million in competitive funding exploring creative practice and diversity, have published 22 books and over 150 articles and chapters exploring gender, sexuality, and living a creative life. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks. Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everybody. Yeah, thanks, Ted, for that really stimulating presentation. Just want to pay my respects and gratitude to the people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, where I am zooming in from today as well, and my thanks for the privilege of living and working on these lands, waters, and airways. Happy Friday, everyone. I'm going to jump right into it because of time. I'm going to share, and this is like a little mini taster workshop. So it's practical, and I'm going to ask you to do a little 3-minute maybe exercise as part of that. And but if you want to know more about this approach, you can get in touch with me later. So the strategy I'm using today is called autoethnography. Some of you may know of it, some of you may not. It's aligned with other sorts of narrative research methods, autofiction, autobiography, narrative inquiry, things like that. And essentially it's driven from the self, but the 3 parts of the word here should flag to you what's important about this method. And a lot of my spare, quote unquote, time, I spend running workshops like this, and normally we would have a lot longer to actually walk through it. But today I'll just give you kind of a taster of how it would run. So autoethnography, the auto is the self. Breaking down the word, the ethno is culture, and graphy is traditionally sort of writing or representation. And it can be in any modality. It doesn't have to be in writing. And there are lots of articles and creative pieces in academic journals out there as exemplars for how that is sometimes done in sound work, in composition, and certainly a lot in visual methods. But essentially, the most important aspect of it is that it's not writing about yourself. It's writing from your own lived experience about, through the lens of the self, about a cultural issue or experience or topic. So it grows out of the history of ethnography, anthropology, and then ethnography. And it centers the researcher slash writer by saying that we always bring our own perspectives to this work, as does very much so creative practice research as well, and teaching usually. So that's why I think it's a particularly good method for creative practice scholars. And it's a really great method of approaching your teaching or converting your teaching into, oh, I should put that on full screen, sorry. Of converting your teaching practice into so-called research outputs. And again, I'm going to talk about this as articles, but please remember that it can be NTROs as well, non-traditional research outputs as well. So I'm taking as the assumption here that we are writing your teaching and creative practice work up as an article. Okay, that's the assumption I'm jumping off from today. And these are some ways of prompting yourself to begin. So position yourself, put yourself into the moment. Where are you? So this is locating yourself in specifics. Where are you in time and space? What is the room environment or atmosphere like? What time of day or year is it? Season, maybe. And then how does the moment sound, smell, and feel like in your body? I think creative practice teachers and researchers, we are particularly good at drawing on embodied learning and embodied aspects of teaching. So to locate this writing or representing in the sensory, I hope will be familiar to most of you. So how might you begin? Well, autoethnographies are not always in the first person present tense, like the second little rectangle there says, begin with I am. They could be past tense, I remember. They could be future tense. They could be second person, third person, second person being you, do you remember when you first walked into my classroom? So on and so forth. But in this instance, we're using the I am. And I'm going to ask you in a minute to just take 2 minutes. I know we're short on time today, but just for us to have a little bit of pause in all the talking and give yourself 2 minutes to have a go at this before we go on. So imagine that you're going to take that invitation in a couple minutes and actually give this a whirl. I invite you to try the most direct and easiest way, which is begin with the I am. So you're thinking of a particular experience in your teaching. Maybe it was in your own past, a pivotal or an important moment in your own schooling experiences, or it could be just this week teaching classes that you teach. Write everything that you're doing and thinking. Again, making links back to this sensory that's on the first little rectangle there. Write everything you're sensing and feeling. Write what the others in that room or place are doing, thinking, sensing, and feeling. And then write yourself into a clear picture of the moment. Okay? And just to reiterate before we take the pause, more, as you would know, more and more and more Australian universities are appointing teaching-focused academics. So the numbers of folks like potentially you who are here with us today, who are in these roles, who feel that you don't have time to do quote unquote research, the numbers of you are growing. And so I take Ted's invitation to make communities of practice, to make communities where you can not only share practice, but write up your practice. And this could be one of those in your own school or, course unit group or whatever. But it's a reminder to you that writing about your teaching is legitimate research. And it's not only for KPIs, it's for creating community, not only the people at your own institution, because sometimes teaching focused academics really have very little time to come together. I know. But it could be other people in a virtual community of practice who are in a similar situation to your own and teaching or exploring similar topics. Okay, next. Next. Okay, I might have to get out. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right, so we won't take 5 minutes, but let's just take 2 minutes and write yourself into your scholarship. So first person, present tense. I'm going to go back to that other slide. I just want you to try and make a start. And part of that is about quieting down and starting to legitimize the experiences that you're having in your classroom context as legitimate research. So let's just take a quiet pause. I'm going to stop talking for 2 minutes, and then I have 5 minutes to wrap up. Okay, give it a whirl. Okay, thanks for that. It's nice to hear the silence. Um, I'm not going to ask if anyone wants to share anything at this point for time constraints. But I did just want to say when I did this last semester with a class of um, arts education pre-service teachers. So they're all artists becoming teachers. And about 40% of them started this first writing exercise with this sentence, I am exhausted. And I thought that was so wonderful because it told me that they immediately felt comfortable to express some vulnerable aspects of this life we're living, and also at the same time, we're willing to validate their feelings in a academic writing session. And I think both as artists and as scholars, the more the universities are so focused on impact these days, and I understand why. But another way of impact, as I believe we all understand it inside of ourselves, is the interpersonal and relational impact capacity of our work. And a lot of people say to me, this isn't legitimate research, or it was really good doing this, but I can't, you can't get stuff like this published. All of that is untrue. It's absolutely been untrue for more than 25 years, and I'm happy to refer you to journals and other kinds of outlets that do publish it. But I want to say, even in regard to what the point Ted was making about personal, spiritual, emotional, creative sustainability in these jobs, this is one way to not only validate and nurture your interior life, but your relational life with your students and with your colleagues. And for that reason, when you think about writing in this way and sharing it with others, it can both position you well in terms of academic publishing or NT non-traditional research outputs, but it can also help you build really deep and meaningful communities of practice. So I've got 2 minutes left. Just to finish up, there are other ways that I walk people through classes, workshops through using this method. And the next one would be writing in the second person, which is a little bit harder, but it's the you, right? Using the you, as I mentioned before. And so even as a writing exercise, or as a painting exercise, as a composing exercise, what does it do for you to be able to uh, go inside the head of that student who is particularly difficult for you, or imagine yourself in the student who's struggling in your class. As exercise, these are all also deeply empathic teaching exercises. And they make for great and very readable articles. The other side of it, though, that we don't have time to get into is weaving the theory into it. So what kind of literature can be used in these kinds of pieces? They're not all first-person narrative, 6,000 word articles or stories or 800 word conversation pieces. They are the best kind of autoethnography is highly theorized, and it can include, as I say here, ethnographic literature, autoethnographic literature, creative practice literature, or you know, practice-led or disciplinary literature like whatever your creative practice field is. And that's a fun part. That's a super fun part. And I'm just going to go this last slide because this is what we would do if we were working together over time. And I encourage you to maybe just try doing this with a friend or with a small group if you've got one. I know a lot of folks these days, we are all feeling isolated in our university context at times. So you think, I don't have anyone here who's doing, graphic novels. So I don't have anyone I can connect with. But you can connect virtually, and you can do it through this organization. And you can use a model like this to meet once a week, write a few words. Like, I'm sure everyone could find an hour to meet together and sit down and write 200 words or 250 words. So I'll just quickly finishing. I've got 11 seconds. You would start with a kind of vignette. This is just one very simple model, but it seems to be an easy one for people new to this to adopt. Okay, there's my alarm. So you start with a compelling, vignette. It draws the audience in. Then you go into the creative practice context. So just as it says, in what context did these events occur? And then you intersperse it, you're slicing it between kind of scholarship and cultural context. That's what section 2, sort of 4 and 6 are. And then interspersed with your autoethnographic narrative in introduction 3, section 3, section 5. Okay. And then you've got your reference list. So it's basically a pretty standard article structure format. And as I say, I think people have found a lot of community, but also debunking the fear or the mountain of trying to produce an article, especially while you're teaching time or teaching on a teaching heavy or teaching only contract, because you can do it in small chunks. That's me. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dan. And thank you, Ted. It's so different, but so interesting. So now we move into a 5-minute session where I welcome questions for Ted and Dan. I have a kickoff question here. The first is for Ted.